Okay, so we are gonna do a thing, and I've sort of had this in the works for like a week now because, I just went on vacation and I just got back yesterday, but we're gonna do a thing. An experiment, an adventure, a side quest, if you will. And I'm just gonna tell you what it is. We are gonna attempt to learn swordplay. Yes, among other things. But essentially, I was doing a little bit of research because I've always wanted to kind of learn some things more hands-on, both for, my book writing and being able to understand things the way they would have sort of worked in similar time periods, And there are things. I have notes on my phone. Hold on. Okay. So, we are going to attempt to learn some historical martial arts. And obviously, I'm not an expert or particularly knowledgeable about any of this, so everything that happens in this video or any videos where we talk about this is all just things I think I'm learning and you should research on your own. So there are two groups that I have learned about. The first is HEMA, which is Historical English Martial Arts, which is learning martial arts from actual historical materials. And it sounds to me like this is a relatively new thing, they started finding and translating these manuals in the last 20, 30 years maybe, or at least it became a big thing recently. But a lot of the manuals that are used for these are more duel focused, right? So these are manuals that were written for swordsmen to use for duels and tournaments and stuff like that. And so they're one-on-one combat focused and not group combat focused. So you see more of a prevalence of certain types of weapons, both due to, which ones would be more likely to be done in this sort of dual way, or ones that are, I guess, the people that would learn from manuals, I guess, So there are a lot about historical longswords. That's the biggest one. And then the other group is called the SCA, which is the Society for Creative Anachronism, which is focused on the study and replication of medieval European culture, so think pre-17th century. And they have something called armored combat, which is a combat sport, so inspired by historical medieval combat, but they're not explicitly learning from medieval materials. They're trying to replicate it, but it's a little bit less super technique focused. I think it sounds like it is for some people, but the point of it is more to be a combat sport, so large group mock battles, but there's actual rules, so think fencing but for large groups. And so obviously there's not as many historical manuals for that specific type of group combat. Obviously you can learn about it, but it's not quite the same. But then the SCA does other things too, they do traditional medieval styled archery and stuff like that, which is cool. And so they have an organization. So HEMA is more Taekwondo, right? There are individual places around where you can go and learn it, or you can find materials online and learn it. The SCA is an organization. And so they are broken up into kingdoms and duchies and groups like that, so that you can kind of connect with your local people and do stuff. And so I actually found mine. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I'm not going to tell you where I live, but I'm in the Kingdom of Atlantia, which is East Coast, United States. And I reached out to them, and they have both combat practice where you can learn how to use a sword and stuff like that. I think my local group focuses more on rapiers from what I can tell, so more similar to more traditional fencing, or I guess less traditional fencing, more modern fencing. Yes. And then they also do archery practice, and this is all super close by to me, so I'm very excited about that. But what we are going to attempt to learn right now is more along the HEMA bent of things. So I have purchased three things. The first is this. Can you see this? The Beginner's Guide to the Longsword, European Martial Arts, Weaponry Techniques, and it's pretty cool. I've started flipping through it a little bit, but we'll get to that in a bit. And then I got Toxophilus, The School of Shooting, which this is, let's see, specifically, I think this is one of the main archery books that is used and more. Like, HEMA isn't technically archery, but it's also sort of archery because, like, archery is a martial activity, art. So this is, like, translated. Like, you have, I think, on one side the original, and then on the other side, like, the other book, maybe? I'm not entirely sure. But this is, like, table of contents. I haven't started looking through it yet. But it looks like it's talking about the Roger Ascham, which I think is the author of this book, or the translator, I'm not sure. It's dedicated to King Henry VIII, to all gentlemen and yeomen of England, the first book of the School of Shooting. So yeah, that's pretty cool. There's like a glossary for like old terms so that you understand what it's saying, but it's pretty cool looking. Like, I don't know. So we have this. And then I have this book, Medieval Swordsmanship, Illustrated Methods and Techniques. And these are obviously, this one and the first book are obviously not like period books. They're modern books that were written based off period things. So this book is mostly referencing a specific Italian style of longswords. And they talk in here about what they use. So mostly this one refers to the teachings of Italian swordmaster Fior de Liberi in his treaty Fior di Battaglia, Flower of Battle, which was first presented in 1409. So it's mostly based off a modern description of a technique of Italian swordsmanship from, I guess, probably the 14th century mostly. So that's what this one is. And then this one, I haven't actually looked at yet. Okay, so they have a whole section in here talking about the manuals that are used and how, you know, a lot of what warriors learned was passed down from person to person, and that, you know, a large population of people, especially people that would have been, you know, in armies, fighters would not have been literate, right? So there's not a ton of historical works on medieval sword use or, you know, fighting skills or like first-person descriptions of battles, right? There's not a lot of that sort of stuff, but there's a bunch of stuff here talking about different manuals that are useful, that were used, that they've translated and tried to make more readable, right? It looks like most of the manuals are more like closer to a Renaissance era. It's sort of, there's this belief that the Renaissance fundamentals that the masters built upon were, you know, patterns from before. They do have some descriptions of techniques in the late medieval Italian and German treaties. But yeah, so then it just talks about like descriptions of positions, and like it has some like pictures here. And this one looks like it's a little bit more comprehensive. Like, I think it's talking about how they were able to pull information and additional descriptions from like drawings and sketches of different positions. And so, yeah, so they have a whole section on swords, which is pretty cool. And, you know, pictures of different positions based off different, you know, weapons and all sorts of stuff. And there's a ton in here. There's a ton in here that I'm going to go through slowly. But my thought is, this is sort of going to be like sword yoga, right? So I convinced my husband to be at least mildly interested in this with me. Like, he doesn't care as much about the historical application or like, so-and-so in the treaty of blah, blah, blah said that whatever. Like, he doesn't care. But he's, he's like, we could do like something athletic together that's sort of like, you know, instead of just doing cycling, which my cycling machine is here, which we try to do a few times a week or 3 or 4. But we can do something that's a bit more like muscle-based, right? Because like sword play is muscular in focus. I don't know. But so I got Don't laugh at me, these. They are not that long, right? These would be definitely not like, I don't think this counts as longsword length, but it clearly can handle either single or double-handed types of things, right? And I got two. I think it's like PVC on the inside and then it's foam. So like I can't whack him hard, but I can whack him a little bit and it won't hurt, because the thing with using actual like sparring swords and the things that they would use in like HEMA and stuff like that and in combat battles is actual like mostly metal, right? So it hurts. So you need to wear armor. It's like fencing. It is just like how in fencing they wore full body armor and you wear like face shields and stuff, because like you can seriously injure yourself and other people by doing this. Like it is a what is that called? An impact sport? I don't know, but I thought this would work for the point of me trying to learn and understand sort of how it works and the positioning, so that I can understand it well enough to write about it. Yes. Alright, so the first book, The Beginner's Guide to Longsword, I have started going through. And I haven't gotten through very far. I've gotten through pretty far. But I haven't like physically worked through it. I've just kind of read through it. And I've learned a lot of things that already point out problems in the books I've written, because they're inaccurate and not realistic. And I don't obviously need to have like super descriptive, accurate swordplay in my books, but it would be helpful for it to be a bit more specific and correct. So there's a lot of stuff in here about parts of the sword, which is really cool. And, you know, I'll have to kind of decide how much of that I want to actually include based off what specific weapons they're using. But like for the longsword, you have, don't know if I can hold this open while I do this, but you have the handle, you have the pommel, you have the blade, and the blade has 3 sections, which is interesting, but this is an Italian book, right? So most of these are in Italian, but you have the forte, which is the part closest to your hilt, and this is the slowest, right? Because it's around your hand, and when you move, like this part moves faster, this part moves slower. So this is the forte. It is the strongest and the slowest, and then you have the foible, which is the tip end, right? And this is the quickest but the weakest, right? Because it's, you know, the thinnest. It's also the sharpest, typically. And then the middle part is the mezzana. I don't know Italian, everyone, but that's like the middle, and it's kind of in the middle in terms of speed and strength. And typically when you like cross with someone, right, you're typically going to be doing it somewhere in here, because up here you don't have the strength to do it, but like in here you do, but then down here, like that's too close to like your hand, I guess. So that was really cool. Let me see. There's a lot of more complicated stuff that I'm not going to get into it with it, like the false edge, the true edge of the blade, sweet spot measurements, where you ideally want to cut people. It talks about lines of the body, which once I start actually playing around with it, I'll get into it. But there's like, from your waist up is your high line, and then you have the low line, and then you have like one side of your body, and then the other, I think it's like inside line, outside line. But then going through here, I don't know what I was expecting, to be completely honest, but this sort of breaks it down into a number of stances, and there's like 12 basic ones from the historical treaty, I guess, and then like one extra one, and they all have ridiculous names. It's fantastic. But they all are like certain positions. Like, okay, your sword is here, your body's here, your weight's here, whatever. And they're like defensive stances, I guess. So like you move and then you come back here, and it's like, I don't know if it's like a ready stance or what you would call it, but like, you know, you're there. And then once you learn all those stances, which there's different ones depending on whether or not you're defending low, you're defending mid, you're defending high. And then there's this whole concept of like the movements, right? And it doesn't actually get into movements that much, because it's mostly just you going from one position to another, and you have to like connect the lines through it, and like attacking through certain lines that you have between yourself and, you know, your opponent, which is a lot. It's kind of overwhelming, and I'm gonna have to like kind of practice them, right? But then it gets into, my husband and my children are home, but it gets into this concept of like tempo and rhythm. And it basically talks about there are moves that are like relatively quick, moves that are slow, moves that are sort of in the middle. So if you imagine like a beat, like a musical beat, some moves are like a half beat, some are a beat, and some are 2 beats. And you need to choose very carefully what type of movement you do based off like what position your opponent's in. And so like if you do a very slow move, but if you choose a really quick move, but your opponent, or if you choose a slow move, so like 2 beats, and your opponent is like in a position where they can attack very quickly, like you're going to be too slow and you're going to move, or you're going to lose and get hit. And if you try and do like quicker moves, those quicker moves probably aren't going to have as much power, but you know, you can block your opponent better, you can beat them, you can move quicker than them, and you don't want to be moving slower than your opponent. And the thing that this kind of like connected with me was I have a lot of like fancy sword play in my book where like they're like spinning and doing all this stuff, and it made me realize that like that is so slow. Like if like having, I think it's like from up here, right? If you strike from up here, the amount of time that it takes your sword to go from up here to down here, say you're blocking like a lower attack versus like an upper attack, right? This takes a really long time comparatively to just like, you know, doing like a small thing. And if that's too slow, doing a full spin in most cases is going to be awful. So that's something that I'm learning that's very interesting, right? This concept of tempo and having to make it like actually make sense and not be like going crazy. And then the other thing that's very interesting is the idea of reach and the way different swords would play with each other, because in a lot of cases, like, I feel like I see books where, you know, you have great swords people who just like fight with anything, or they're like, I'm gonna fight against your longsword with like 2 daggers or something like that. And that, like, just from my very limited reading of this, that's horrible. Like, even for like a talented swords person, right? Like, that's awful. Because your reach is such a big deal, right? Like if I am standing here and you're standing there and I can hit you and you can't hit me, I have an extreme advantage. And it's not that it can't be countered, but like, why would you go into a fight like that where you're going to be disadvantaged that much? And like a dagger against a longsword? No. Like unless you like jump scare, surprise someone, like you can't get close enough, right? Without getting hit, because the amount of time it takes you to move forward, I can hit you, right? Which is definitely not something I honor in my book so far, but I'm gonna change that. And I've seen it a lot in other books, which is a problem, but that is a thing. So reach is a thing. The types of weapons that you would pair up, right? Like there's certain weapons that you wouldn't fight against other weapons with. And also just a general idea that like it's so different fighting with different types of weapons. Like there's a lot of very different styles, which I didn't really know about. But I don't know, that's kind of where I am right now. I haven't started actually practicing anything. I've just sort of started reading, but it reminds me of chess. Like chess yoga, right? Where it's just tons of positions, and depending on which stance you're in and which stance your opponent's in and the way they move, like there's only so many options you have to move in, because if they're swinging their sword at you, you need to like block or parry their weapon, right? And then that limits the number of positions you can go into after them. So you have to play the defensive and then move into the offensive or attempt to like combine it, right? And it's like, you can't just like go do all this crazy stuff, right? Because you have to move based off how your opponent's moving. And it's like such this back and forth thing that it's very, very cool and a little overwhelming and complicated, because like I don't know how to play chess. It seems like a lot, right? But it's the same thing. It's like physical chess. And that's very interesting. And like, I don't know. I've just been going through here and trying to like read about it. I haven't even gotten to the drill section. I need to actually sit down and practice some of the like positions. But like, it's kind of a lot. And like, I don't know. It's a lot, but I'm excited to kind of play with it and figure it out. But like look, there's stances, right? This is the open iron door, or the tutta porta di ferro. I can't speak Italian. Tutta porta di ferro. I don't know. But yes, I'm gonna be working on this. I'm going to be practicing the stances. I'm going to be showing you what I'm learning and how it sort of applies to like writing sword fights, right, in books. And I feel like most of us fantasy writers, we tend to write a lot of scenes that are more like duel-y focused versus just like open war. This is not super helpful for open war, but I'm going to try and get involved with my local SCA group and see what I can learn with that, and maybe like applying this knowledge and this understanding already tells me a lot about how like group combat would have to work, and the fact that like you can't just have individual people just going crazy on a battlefield. Like that will not work. Everyone will die. Like you're so exposed that way. Like it's not a thing you can do. There has to be tactic and strategy and group formations and group movements, and you have to work as a group or you're all gonna die. And I need to fix all of that in my book. So we're learning, but for now, my children are home. I need to do some more reading, and we will continue with this side quest later. Okay, so I've upped my game a little bit, and I would say I didn't necessarily have any game before because I hadn't really gotten anywhere, but I have upped that game by a few levels. So first things first is I got another book, which I realized that my Beginner's Guide to Longsword, which is based on Fiore's Flower of Battle, didn't have everything in here that was in the Flower of Battle, and it also had a bunch of extra stuff, so I was like, this isn't really the manual, you know what I mean? It's not like the manual, it's the techniques of some of it. And I think that this is a really good way to like learn from the manual, but I was like, if I'm gonna go hardcore, let's go hardcore, right? So I purchased this, and I don't know how well you can see this, but this is the Flower of Battle, the most complete version that they have, and it has been translated, but those translations have been placed in place of the actual text in the actual pamphlet, if that makes sense. So let me turn this open to you, but so this is sort of like what it looks like. So you have all the like normal stuff, the illuminations and the calligraphy, and obviously all of this is typed because it's the translated edition, but it still has all the same little like notes that was in the original, but it is in English, just translated from Italian. And so it's very cool. It's definitely hard to learn from. Like, I understand why this is, like, difficult, but if I get into, like, I don't know, this is a lot of stuff in it, from, like, grappling to single hand, two-hand, fighting between different types of weapons. And it's broken down into, like, moves, I guess. So, like, each page sort of looks like this for the most part, where they have 4 moves, and it was, like, a pamphlet, so I think it was, like, folded 4 ways. I'm not sure, but there's all the different positions, and some of them are like in response to other ones, and I don't understand what all the terms mean, but I found all the like guards and plays and everything that was in this book in here. So I've sort of been going through and like making notes and marking the reference, and then I've marked in here where they all come from the manual, and I've been going through here. And it's just like, it's really cool. Like, let me read this to you. So one of the positions, let's find a good one. We'll go to the window guard, which is this one right here. And this is the posta de finestra instabile. I don't know how to pronounce Italian, but we'll go with it. Which is the windows guard. And the text says, and again, this is translated, "This is the window guard who is always quick, skillful, and deceptive. It's a master at covering and striking. It threatens all opposing guards, whether high guards or low guards. It moves quickly from this guard to other guards to confuse its opponent, and it is a very good guard from which to make powerful thrusts, break the opponent's thrust, or exchange points." That's what it says on it. So, obviously, it doesn't tell you anything about how to do it, right? You're supposed to look at the picture and learn from that. Which, like, again, along a large population of people were more, like, I don't know, like, literate. But one thing I think I learned about this, actually, from something else, which I'll tell you about later, but apparently the Fiore, the instructor here, was like a high-end instructor. Like all of his plays, the guards he taught, everything he taught was like super secretive. So if he had a student, if someone else came to watch, they'd have to like swear to secrecy that they weren't gonna like spread it, kind of thing. So it was only like the super like rich, I don't even know is rich, but like super selective who he would teach, like personally teach and tutor his methodology to. And then he wrote this when he was like 70 something, I think, as he was dying, and he's like, I want to be remembered by something. So then he made this manual that, you know, people could read because it wasn't in Latin, which was like vogue at the time, I guess. I've been nerding up. But it's very, very cool. So I've been looking through this, and I also did a couple other things. I know, I'm crazy. So on Saturday, I went to an SCA event, which is the Society for Creative Anachronisms. I don't know. Think of it like Renfest, but like more intense. And I got to watch some like some like sparring sessions. It wasn't like a tournament or anything, but I got to see the people that actually do this, like doing it, like the different types of fighting. And there's a big distinction between like light and heavy. And so like the heavy fighters have to wear like full armor because you need to be protective, because when you do like a slashing cut like this, or like I guess technically any sort of cut, that's percussive, right? And so that can cause a lot of damage, so you have to be very protected, so you kind of have to wear armor in order to just do it safely at all. So that was kind of intense to watch, and a lot of them like fought with shields. It was like shield and longsword was like the main thing I saw there. And then the light fighters did rapier, which is, I think the styles that they do are normally like a little bit more modern, because rapier was a little bit later in the medieval period for when it sort of became a thing, but they didn't have to wear as much armor. So like they had maybe about as much armor as like a modern fencer would wear. Like they had to wear a face guard. They wore gorgets, which is like armor to protect like this part and is stiff. And then like some general like padding, like minimal stuff, just to make sure that you're not going to get like punctured, you know? And it was very interesting seeing the differences between how you could fight in both of them, and just like imagining what someone that fought with a rapier, because like from my understanding, a rapier isn't really it's not the type of combat that fit in with like heavily armed combat. Like a knight wasn't going to be fighting with a rapier because it doesn't make sense. Like a rapier can't really do anything to someone who's in full like plate armor. So like a knight is not going to be fighting with a rapier. So like just being able to visually see like these super heavily armored, like wearing potentially like period style plate mail and having a longsword and a shield, like versus the really lightweight like rapier kind of style, it's like kind of it's been educational. It's been educational. So then I also went to one of their practices, and I learned some of the basics for rapier, because I don't have anything for rapier here, and I kind of wanted to understand that like more one-handed, more finesse style, because it's sort of the very opposite of the spectrum. So I have thoughts on that, and then I was going through this, which is actually, I think these are more helpful for like learning it, but for understanding like the history and why things are the way they are, this was very interesting, and I want to kind of show you some of the things I've learned about like why different cultures would develop different styles of swordsmanship and armoring and all that stuff. Like you can draw a lot of parallels based off what's in here, so I want to talk about that. But first, I want to show you the things that I have learned. So let me move things around real quick.